Hello, everyone. It's Jamal Thomas. Welcome to the Progressive Soapbox. So, recent news broke about Facebook losing the data of, I think, around 50 million people, some ridiculous amount. What's less known, though, is that in 2012, when the Obama administration was running the campaign, it was either 2008 or 2012, one of those years, but the Obama administration was using Facebook analytics, essentially the social graph of Facebook. Now, they got their hands on pretty much every person who's on Facebook because they were able to go through the contact list of all of the people on Facebook. Now, Facebook found out that they were using this in this particular way. In fact, one of the people kind of mentioned, and I can't certainly know that if this is true, but what was said, or the person kind of made point of, yeah, they knew what we were doing, but they said we were on their side. Or, they were within the same camp. Now, that rings true to me because if you look at the election, during the time where Hillary Clinton's emails was the top discussion, if you were looking at Facebook, Google, or Twitter, there were shadow banning certain content and certain information. So if you typed in Hillary Clinton's emails, you might get Hillary Clinton loved cats, Hillary Clinton loved ponies. You wouldn't get anything about those emails. This was taking place on Google, and this was taking place on Twitter and Facebook. So it doesn't shock me that they would say, we're okay with it. We're a private enterprise. We can do whatever we want as a private enterprise. And yes, we have this billions of people using our particular service. But if we want to be partial to a particular party or a particular candidate, it's our choice. Private enterprise, totalitarian system. People are freaking out at the Trump thing. But the analytics that Obama had on pretty much everybody, and the woman who was giving this lecture, I'm going to do a video on that particular TED Talk. But when she was giving this, it wasn't a TED Talk, but the woman who was giving a lecture worked with the campaign. And as she explained it, they had their hands on all of the information, meaning the Democratic Party. Meaning they could micro-target in the same way that they're talking about Cambridge Analytica. Like, I'm making a point that this was somewhat of a precursor to Cambridge Analytica. People are freaking out about the Trump thing, but they're okay with the Obama thing. So, fair enough. One of the items... Yeah. So, they were okay with that part. Now, all of these people's information was given over for private interests. Ultimately, some company, some person, some plutocrat will come to Facebook and say, hey, we want you to run ads. Okay. And in this kind of seedy, salacious way where they get money in Zuckerberg's G-string and pretty much will say anything you want to say. They'll publish it. We're getting paid. The world is great. They're just putting out an ad. Now, this contrasts this scenario. The scenario that I just put. Publicizing all this information of private and corporate interests purely for some kind of profit motive, incentive. Essentially spying on their users in this way. In some cases, we found out they were keeping text messages and they were keeping phone calls. Now, what would they be using that information for? And do you honestly believe that Facebook would not sell that information if they thought they could make some kind of profit or a buck off of it? Contrast this scenario with Julian Assange. Now, Julian Assange has, instead of giving over people's information and giving over private information, he's assiduously hid the people who feed him information, while at the same token, publicizing all that information out for the public. Meaning, instead of publicizing information for the top 1% that Zuckerberg is getting from the people who are using his service, Assange is doing the opposite. He's publishing information of the 1%, or the governing class as they call themselves, to the rest of the population, to the 99%. Meaning, he's not doing it for profit. He's doing it because he realizes this is right. For all intents and purposes, if people are going to have a government, and that government be accountable to the people as opposed to the other way around, those people would need to know what the government is doing. How on earth can you hold a government accountable if the government is lying to you, or if the government is hiding information that will be damaging, that will be illegal, or embarrassing? Hide this information under state secrets. How do you know what your government is doing if your government is not telling you or providing information, or there's no media covering it? How do you know? How do you know? For all intents and purposes, media has just become stenographers. They get access, they get a certain amount of status, they get to schmooze up with the politicians. Oh, we're buddies, we're in it together. You're not supposed to be in it together. You're supposed to be investigative journalism. You're supposed to hold power accountable. You're supposed to be the mouthpiece of the masses, who's giving the masses information that they can use to live their lives in a fulfilled way. You give them junk. You're talking about Stormy Daniels and Trump. The president has sex with a hooker. The problem with this is the reality has been monetized also. They have a profit motive in the information that they give you. It's not information that you necessarily need. That information may be dry. They want to put asses in seats. They have a bottom line just like everybody else. And this is, you can understand, somewhat problematic. I need to know what my senators are doing. I need to know the legislation the president is passing. I need to know what these guys are doing behind the scenes. If they're trying to pass the Trans-Pacific Partnership, I need to know that. That's something that you as a press are supposed to be on the side of the American public, not smoothing it up with the people in power. Fact is, Julian Assange has tried to make people aware of what their government is doing in the shadows, what these corporate shady interests are doing in the shadows, and they don't like that. Fact is, it is impossible for a public to hold the government accountable if the public doesn't know what the government is doing. I've argued with people who were like in the military and who stuck to this idea of, well, hey man, there's some things that we should know. What does that mean? The things that you should know. Is your government accountable to you or not? Meaning, are you philosophically bound to keep track of your government, to keep your government curbed and not the other way around? How on earth do you know what they're doing? When Obama is out there paying terrorists to undermine Syria, when they're paying terrorists to undermine Libya, when they're telling you one thing and behind the scenes they're doing something completely different. That's Julian Assange. Facebook is selling information, getting billions of dollars off of selling that information. And Julian Assange is stuck in an Ecuadorian embassy for 6 years because instead of selling people's information to the top 1%, he chose the harder path and selling that information to everyone else, or giving that information to everyone else. In one of my other videos, I made the point that just because you do good doesn't necessarily mean good will follow. Now, I said that was one of those things that was somewhat incongruous to me. You would think that the incentive structure that would be built in the system would push people to do good deeds, push people to do better, to be their better selves or best selves. But not so much. We have this competitive system, dog eat dog. The fact is, we're functioning within a game space. Within a game space, there are power centers. Now, Assange, the information that he's publishing is directly going at these particular power centers. When you're the scale to which it was taking place, nor the illegality of that particular policy. You wouldn't know that the way Obama was interpreting the spying bill went well beyond the creation of the people who intended it. And that wasn't a Bush administration. Like, I'm trying to get across these things that you would know. You would know that the United States gunned down a Reuters agent with the pilot not knowing who he was shooting, and ended up shooting Reuters agent reporters. Now, you wouldn't know that. Fact is, we've killed thousands of civilians. But again, this is not something that you necessarily see, nor do you see the horror and the tragedy of what takes place abroad. You would think that the media, if it was living up to its philosophical responsibility, would do such a thing. They do not. Julian Assange, however, does. Julian Assange does. Not to mention, he protects his sources while doing it. They've never had anything wrong in everything that he's published. And the fact is, he can't have anything wrong, because the moment that he does, they would try to use it to tear him down. For all intents and purposes, Julian Assange is a goddamn hero. Now, like I said, just because you do good doesn't necessarily mean good follow. You're doing something that's not just in the public's interest. It's beyond the public interest. These states, these security apparatuses that these guys create for themselves, this air of secrecy that pervades certain content, those things that have their own fuck-up foibles. Imagining, why on earth would you hide the Trans-Pacific Partnership? Why? Why? Explain to me why. What would be the incentive to hide the Trans-Pacific Partnership? You would hide it if it was a shitty bill that was going to fuck over the rest of the United States population and lock us into these things where we become subordinate to corporate interests. Yeah. If you didn't want people to see that, yes, you would hide that bill for several years even after people signed onto it. Julian Assange published it, trying to get across this thing of this noble, decent path that this man has taken. For this, they put a case on him. And not just put a case on him, they put a case on him. The United States has been after Julian Assange. Now, the thing is, he's not an American citizen. If I'm not mistaken, he's an Australian citizen. We have no jurisdiction over anything that Julian Assange does in this case, but yet, being the bully of the world, have pushed and cajoled these countries into acting in ways that go against their probably, under normal circumstances, better nature. So a case is put on Assange. Now, this case that's put on Assange has been released. It was a bogus case to begin with. At least I think it was a bogus case. It's clear to me that they were trying to get their hands on him. They were looking for any way they could do to get their hands on him. Now, in this case, the case has been dismissed. They've moved along. The prosecutors dropped it. Dismissed is a legal term. They've dropped it. Let's say it that way. He's still stuck in an Ecuadorian embassy in Britain. He's been there for 6 years. Stuck in an Ecuadorian embassy in Britain. The only thing that he's done is the news. Investigative journalism. The real way of investigative journalism. That's all he's done. What does it say about our system when a person who's actually doing investigative journalism, essentially holding power accountable? If you're going to do something as a power or entity, do it. If you have to hide it, that's some kind of consciousness of guilt. Show it. And Assange shows it. And for that, they persecute him. They try to get him. They try to put him in a cage. And for all intents and purposes, they've ended up putting him in somewhat of a cage. He's been stuck in the Ecuadorian embassy for 6 years. Recently, the story has just broke that they've taken away his internet privilege. And they've taken away, if I'm not mistaken, visitation. I'll read the story. But, you know, it's bad enough to be stuck in an embassy for 6 years for doing nothing wrong. You've done nothing wrong. The power centers in this particular game space don't like what he's doing because what he's doing is something right and he's holding them accountable. And for that, like I said, he's punished. They've taken away his internet privilege, meaning not even being able to interact with the rest of the world through the digital space. Now, their reasoning for doing this, I mean, this is relatively sick. He's already stuck in an embassy. But their reasoning for doing this, the Ecuadorian embassy, the reason for doing this is because he challenged Britain's idea or Britain's narrative of events dealing with this spy being poisoned. He challenged their narrative of events. Theresa May has asserted, that's all she's done, asserted that it was Russia's fault. They were highly likely being the culprit of this particular thing. Boris Johnson, clown Boris Johnson, comes out and says it's Vladimir Putin. The very next day. The first day, it's likely. The next day, it's Vladimir Putin's fault. Julian Assange made the point of, where's the beef? He challenged their narrative of events. I've challenged their narrative of events. And are you telling me that challenging the narrative of events is to be punished in this case? He's not interfering in electoral politics. He's not interfering in anything. He's given his goddamn opinion. Yeah, I think it's bogus. If she can't show evidence, I think it's bogus. And until she shows evidence for such a thing, I'm going to think it's bogus. Are you telling me that somebody's speaking out on that to say, this smells. This doesn't look right. Be wary of your government. There were no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. That's not insane to say. That makes perfect sense to say. Are you telling me that he can't even get an opinion on these type of issues? You've taken away his internet access for giving his opinion. Look, I'm just saying, it's bad enough that he's in that cage in the first place. But now they're punishing him further for something that he said on Twitter. Ecuador, look, you guys have a beautiful country. I got this jacket from Ecuador. I went earlier in the year. I found the people to be affable and awesome. Extraordinarily nice. My cab driver ends up giving me a little gift before I left. Yeah. I used him to go all around the city, and I guess I was overpaying him or something. He was like, thank you very much. Here's a little gift from us to you. Couldn't speak a lick of English. We used this little English translator, and we had a moment in the cab. I thought the people work was extraordinary. I would ask you to go with your better angels in this. I understand you're being pushed. I understand you're being bullied. I understand you're being pushed by the UK, the United States, in this mad dash to try to get their hands on them. And if you remember, Sweden was pushed. They even admitted it, that they were being pushed on this. They believe that there is a warrant behind Britain's warrant for Assange. And they're probably right. Fact is, the United States is waiting to extradite Assange to the United States, to which he is not a citizen and has no oath to anything else to, and yet extradite him to the United States to put him in a cage. Fuck the law. Fuck the legal system. Fuck international law. Fuck all of that. We have nuclear weapons. We give you guys a lot of money. We have military bases all around the world. We want him. We're going to get our hands on him. He's telling too much factually true information about us. And Hillary Clinton was the last straw. By the way, the Clinton Foundation, that place being a slush fund, that was also WikiLeaks. Cheating Sanders, that was also WikiLeaks. Assange is a goddamn hero. Yes, the power structure doesn't necessarily like Assange, but you should ask yourself, why does the power structure like Assange? That should give you your answer. If you're a lefty, if you're somebody who considers yourself, what's the word I'm looking for? Skeptical of power, or skeptical of power centers. Honestly, I don't like this situation where the government hides these things, because the government is hiding these things for a reason. And it's not always national security. It's not always national security. So, I am skeptical of power, yes. I'm a lefty on this. I am fucking libertarian. I don't like my government having this much secrecy. Mind you, they're spying on you. Like, they're building these facilities in order to keep more and more of your information. Not to mention you have the Stasi state. I just did an article the other day where Best Buy, the Geek Squad, was literally looking into people's computer in order to get something on a person to give to the FBI in order to get, the paid off. Fucking amazing. All I'm saying is the United States used to talk all that shit about the Soviet Union, all of these spies, people whispering behind each other's back and everything else. And they're doing the same thing here. They're doing the same thing here. That's a side point. The fact is, they don't like Assange because Assange is telling the truth. And he's giving you the tools and the information that you otherwise would not get, and that these guys in power fight like hell for you not to get. He's vital. He's important. But like a lot of other people who were vital and important, who did amazing fucking things, those people were often persecuted and only looked back at, in historical terms, as being fucking awesome. And just to put it in context, Martin Luther King came out strongly against the Vietnam War. No, I'm not making a comparison between the two. I'm just using this as an example. He came out strongly against the Vietnam War. Now, this costly war that was started on the premise of a lie, or pretext of a lie, the Gulf of Tonkin, never took place. But this costly war, all of these American lives, all of these people that were killed and mangled and broken, all of these people, all of the Vietnamese that were killed, I think it was like over 1 million, like 2 million Vietnamese, were killed in that war. A war that never needed to happen. And yet still, this idea of a Cold War and everything else kind of led to a certain series of events. Essentially a bunch of bad decisions and hawks in the Democratic Party. Martin Luther King came out strongly against that war. And he came out strongly against that war during the time where he was cozying up to the Democratic establishment, meaning LBJ. LBJ was incensed by this. And if I remember correctly, he pulled his security detail. Like, that's how angry he was at this. And yet, King did it because King looked at it as the same boot that's on the throat of the Vietnamese is the same boot that's used on the throat of, he would say, Negroes in America. Fact is, King made the point that you can't spend that much money abroad killing people and then tend to your affairs at home. And made this even a stronger point of saying a country that is willing to do that Let's just say it's not on the right side of God and not on the right side of morality. That is strong words. You're talking about this kind of repressive society of the 60s, and he's saying these bombshell statements. They try to make Martin Luther King act like he was a peacenik. This man was a goddamn radical. I mean, he's saying this stuff with this kind of religious fervor to it, like this fire and thunder as he's giving a speech where he's condemning America from this moral center, this high moral standard in this way. Yes, he was just a person, meaning he had his fuck-ups and foibles and everything else. But in the capacity of being judge and prosecutor, he was amazing. Absolutely amazing. The point I'm making here is, after that fire and fury about it, you had some people, even of his own color, saying Martin Luther King needs to shut up about this Vietnam stuff and get back to that class, this racial stuff. What is this Negro talking about this Vietnamese stuff for? How dare he? You're going to fuck up what we got with the Democratic Party. You should read the articles about what came out after he gave that speech. People attacked him for that. He attacked him for it. We look back on history and we say, man, that was fucking amazing. But at the time, they attacked him for it. I'm making this point that despite being on the right side of history, that doesn't necessarily mean that in that particular moment, people understand that that's the right side of history. Assange is the right side of history, and he is being persecuted for being the right side of history. At the very least, his internet access and all this other stuff needs to be restored. Ecuador is acting hysterical and needs to put that. They need to calm down. If you were nice enough to allow him to stay, if you were nice enough to get him a passport, if you were nice enough to shield him from these maniacs and these goons in these other countries like the UK and the United States, then please turn back on his access. At the very least, allow him to have some access to the outside world. You've turned it into a cage. You've turned your embassy into a cage at this point. I'll leave it at that. I'm not going to rant about this. Look, people should be skeptical about their government. They should be. What has taken place that would allow you to have any level of this kind of hope and dreams about the intentions of the people who are running your country? Those people are bought, and those people are serving a very specific interest. That interest is not you. They need you for your vote, and that's the extent of the involvement that they will prefer you to be in this process. Like I said, Assange turns that upside down. So, I'll leave it at that. Let him out. He's supposed to be out. They've even declared by the UN that he should be free. Let him out. He served 6 years. It's fucking enough. He shouldn't have served any time at all. Let him out. Leave it at that. Thanks, guys.